Amber Artemis here, and I am so excited to sit down with Sarah Petyk, the founder and owner of Allium Floral Design. She's been operating her business for more than 16 years. She's been in the floral and event industry for more than 25. So she's got a lot of wisdom and knowledge to share with us today, and I can't wait to talk with her. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited to chat a bit.
Learn how to start a business in your community with Launch Local podcast, full of know-how and inspiration from successful small business owners, including your host, Amber Artemis. Hey,
Right.
Sarah, how's it going?
Hey, it's good to be here. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's so nice to see you. Thanks for taking the time to do this interview with me today.
Yeah, I'm really excited about kind of this whole project and what you're doing. And I can't wait to hear from other business women about kind of what they're doing too. It's so exciting.
I'm actually not limiting it to just business women.
Ooh.
I'm just casting a wide net, looking for people, in the small business world that I admire, and you are certainly one of them.
Aw, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but it's not an understatement. So, let me just jump in and give you a little introduction. So, today we're talking with Sarah Petyk from Allium Florals. She has been a floral designer for more than 18 years, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so more than 18 years, she's been a floral designer for events and weddings, and she's worked in the wedding and event industry longer than that for more than 25 years. So you are street tested and have probably a lot of good stories to tell.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's always an adventure in the events world for sure.
Yeah. It's funny, already off on my first tangent here. I think of, a lot of the sources of drama in my life, it comes from expectations, like when you expect something to go a certain way and then the expectation doesn't match up with the reality. Like I feel like the events world is where that is probably all the time happening.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's literally like putting out fires all the time, right? And I my personality is very attuned to that. Like I love that constant, ooh, this needs to be fixed, that needs to be fixed. Flowers didn't come in the way we wanted them to this week. How are we going to source them in a different way? How are we going to get this final outcome? And I laugh with my team, but I mean it's a sad but true thing that we only have one shot at perfection, right? So on wedding days, the expectation it's either going to be there and be fabulous or it's not, and someone's going to feel disappointed. So that's why I think it's so, for us it feels like the stakes are higher, right? So I think that we see a lot of that in the wedding industry.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like your personality is well suited to that reality. So that's
Yeah.
really cool.
and and I do thrive on that. So like that does feel exciting to me. If I had to show up at a 9 to 5 job where I did the same thing over and over and over and over again, I think I'd have a really, really hard time.
Yeah, it's good to know yourself. So I have a wedding photography background. This is how we know each other, full disclosure. When I was first asked to shoot a wedding, I thought about all the pressure of that day at first. When I was still in college, when somebody approached me and said, "Hey, you're pretty good with that camera. Would you shoot my wedding?" And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no." It wasn't until I realized, what wedding photography could be, that it was a more creative endeavor, and that part of my personality too that thrives in adaptation and the excitement of the moment, was like, okay, I can do this. But I've met plenty of people who are like, no thank you, like they just think weddings are going to be too stressful for them, and they just don't want that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
So let's get a little bit more info about your background.
Sure.
So where are you from originally?
So I'm from the Lehigh Valley, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, originally. I did go north of Boston to a really small liberal arts college called Gordon. I studied communications there and worked in a PR firm right out of college. I loved it, but the piece I really enjoyed was the event planning, like the launches of products. That was really exciting to me. It was my first real for I'd always kind of worked in the restaurant industry or done jobs that were more kind of like here and there pieced together. This was my first real 9 to 5. I work for somebody who's expecting me to show up on time, do these things. And it was hard for me. I talked earlier about the kind of that monotony of the schedule. And so the part of the job that felt exciting was this event planning piece. And I was working for a restaurant, bartending at the time, and their event planner left. And I said, hey, I think I can do this. I really want to do this role. I think it would be so exciting, and I would get to plan people's events, and this would be wonderful. And I have this background, and so they took a chance and they hired me, which was amazing. And so I started event planning. I worked for almost 5 years, and that was in Salem, Massachusetts. So we had lots of like wild and crazy October times. Summer was very popular and busy, but we had an event space that we would book. And so I would book weddings and other events there. And that's really where I got my start in the event world.
And when I met you, I actually met you first over the phone. Do you remember this?
No,
Uh,
and now I'm like, whoa, what juicy story does she have?
well, you were an event planner. I think it was pre-Floral business. You were an event planner for a new trendy restaurant called Melt in Center
Yeah.
Valley, and you found our wedding photography website and reached out to us, and we had not even moved back to Pennsylvania yet. Like, we were living in Oregon. I remember it well, actually. Like, I was walking on the street outside of my house in Oregon talking to you on the cell phone, and I was like, "Who is this friendly person reaching out to me from the East Coast?" Like, it felt really good because I believe, like, all cool people will find each other eventually, and you just cut to the chase, and we just found each other right away, and we were new friends immediately. But you were casting a net in your new role as event planner because you wanted to know, who the vendors were that you were going to gel or vibe with, essentially. And you liked our style and you thought, we would be working together eventually. And you just wanted to introduce yourself, which was like the most proactive, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And so it's just
No,
so friendly, and it was great. And I was like, wow, who is this Sarah chick? I'm just gonna love her. She's great. And it made me more enthusiastic too, because we were relocating our business, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And it just felt good to know that, there were good people in the scene there.
yeah, I think for me that's always a theme, right? Like I love to draw community to me. I love to like cast this net and bring in people who feel like-minded. So especially in that role, we were getting our space was a little unique to have a wedding in. And as I was meeting with other vendors in the area, it was like the same old, same old, same old. Like everything felt like it was in this very specific mold. And so I was really looking for vendors who I knew my clients would gravitate toward because they weren't your sort of traditional ballroom wedding clients. And that's what I loved about you because I felt like you really were capturing their story, their essence. It wasn't just like, okay, here's this lineup of everybody together. This is really even before social media was a thing. It's
A little bit.
dating ourselves a little bit, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, we were like really looking at people's websites and trying to say like who could this fit? And the ironic part about that is that is actually how I ended up creating my floral business. Uh,
Yeah, can you, like, connect the dots here for me? So how did you like, you came back to the Lehigh Valley in that event planning role, is that correct?
well, not totally. I had been doing event planning, and my dad had passed away, and my mom had gotten diagnosed with cancer, and I sort of felt like we hadn't talked about how long she might still be with us, but I really kind of wanted to be there with her, around her, near her. And so I had said, I'm never, I loved being north of Boston. I still love north of Boston, right? I spend maybe like 3 weeks there every year, but I just like felt like I needed to be back home. So it was 2008 and I had flipped 2 houses, and I was like, "I'm gonna flip houses." This is like, right before the crash.
Yeah.
So, we started to say, like, "Let's do this together," my husband and and I was like, "Well, I'm just gonna wait tables on the side because I think, like, we need to have some income coming in while we're trying to sort this all out." And at that restaurant, I was like, "I need a break." Event planning is a really, really intense job. The burnout rate is super high. The rate of disease in people who are event planners, they say it's like one of the top 3 most stressful jobs because you're handling people's emotions on really, really big days. We talked about that need for perfection, like things need to go smoothly so that people feel like they have a great experience. And so I was like, "Oh, I need a little break from this. We're going to flip houses. We're going to do this." And then the market went kaput. And I was like, I think I need to figure out something a little bit more solid. And so their event planner was not working out for them. And I said, this is in my background. I'd be open to this role. And so that's how I ended up in that role. And as we were starting to get some couples coming through, I had this one couple that and it literally 16 years ago was their wedding. So there's this couple that I just absolutely adored. They were fabulous. And they were both artists, right? So she actually worked for Anthropology designing their windows. So if you like, all of those really cool windows that they do. And he was a sculptor. They just were such a great couple. And so they said, "We're looking for a florist who can do something different for us. Like everyone we're going to is showing us these albums of red roses and baby's
And
breath."
baby's breath.
Yeah, yeah, and like leather leaf fern, and it's just not our thing. And in my previous role as an event manager, the floral designer who did the flowers for our venue, we became friends and I would occasionally help her out on weddings. She was totally self-taught. I loved what she did and what she brought to the table. Her work was very organic. She just like picked these flowers that she loved and put them together. And so I said to the couple, I was like, "Listen, I have this background. I've done design before. I know that you're not going to find anyone in the Lehigh Valley who can do this for you. Would you be willing to take a chance? Like, I'm just literally, I will charge you the cost of the flowers. And I would love to do this for you if you feel like you're willing to take a chance on me." And, there are always those times in life where you're like, which way is the road going to go? I feel so much gratitude to them that they were like, "Yes, let's do this." And I did flowers for their wedding and it was in my kitchen, right? And my husband's like, "Maybe you could do this. Could this be like a job for you?" And I was like, "Yeah, right. No, this is not a thing." But after their wedding, I booked 3 other weddings. So a server who was getting married and saw the flowers, and guests who were attending that wedding saw the flowers and said, like, we love this. This is different. We want to do this. And so little by little, I started to really build my business. But like many people, when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, I needed a safety net. So I was working full time in my restaurant, and that's like a 60+ hour a week job. And then on the side, I was booking these weddings and doing flowers. So I'd work all day. I'd come home. I'd like try to have appointments with clients on days when I wasn't on my days off. And then I would go back to work all night designing a wedding, deliver the wedding, go close the restaurant. I mean, when I think back to what I was really like pushing hard and pushing myself to do, I'm sort of like amazed and also like sad for myself that I didn't give myself some space and downtime. But it did ramp the business up really fast.
There's a few things in there like I have questions about. So let's unpackage some of that. So first of all, we talked about like how you ended up in event planning, but how did you end up in floral design?
Yeah. So because I'd had this background, so we'll start in the very beginning, right? My parents were divorced when I was in second grade, and we went to live with my grandparents. My grandparents lived in this beautiful home that my great grandfather actually built. And he was sort of like one of the original, like he was friends with Rodale. It was really into organic gardening. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And my grandmother grew all kinds of flowers, like zinnias, and there was wild honeysuckle growing everywhere. And we always had beautiful arrangements on her dining room table. Like she would do a little foraging, she would do a little clipping in the garden. And I loved that aspect. And she would always encourage me to, go clip things and go put things together. So I feel like it's very much at the heart of who I am. I love to work with my hands. I love that, like anything crafty. I mean, many of us who are drawn to the floral industry, that's what we love. That's what inspires us. I love looking at color and shape and texture and putting them together to create something beautiful. So that's really the foundation, right? Little Sarah, excited about doing floral design.
Picking
So,
flowers at your grandma's house.
yeah. And so when I met my friend and started to work with her in Massachusetts, so this floral designer who worked at the restaurant, she took me to the flower market with her, right? She was really sharing because she was just starting out in her business. She was just a little bit older than I was. And she was really sharing, like, this is what it takes to run a business. She had no prior experience, right? And so it was kind of amazing because I was really able to see her failures, her successes, the way she would pivot and change and do different things based on kind of what her clients in the market were. I mean, it was a really interesting foray into this floral design world because it wasn't just like, oh, I'm coming to work for an established business and I'm doing the pretty flowers, but I actually got to see her running her business, the floral business piece, not just the pretty design. So that was really inspiring to me.
So you were mentored essentially by somebody
By accident.
in Salem. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I kinda didn't get that, like, I missed that part, like, when you were talking about your experience in Sa is it was it in Salem? You were
Yeah, yeah.
saying north of Boston. Okay, alright, so, um, your events experience up there it involved working closely with a floral designer.
Yeah, so I was doing the event planning, and then because I was friends with her, we had just started to she would say, "Oh, I could use help, for a wedding on this day." So I would come, much like my other job, I would come and I would work all day for her, and then I would go in the evening and work my event at night.
Wow. Um, man, you had to have been in your 20s.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No doubt.
That's great. So working closely with somebody who you were their assistant, but she also sounds like she took you under her wing a little bit to show you. I mean, because it wasn't necessary for you to go with her while she was sourcing things, right? Like that was just you were friends. Come along, or
Yeah,
did
and that
she
was
know?
out of curiosity too, right? Like, I wanted to
Mhm.
know, okay, so how does this work? Like, I bet the flower market is amazing. I wanna go see that in action, right? And so she was kind enough to take me along and let me experience those pieces as I had that curiosity about it.
That's great. So when you crossed over into event planning back in Pennsylvania, you had already had that experience, and that's where, the 18 years comes from. It was like 2 years up there.
Yeah, yeah, and
Is
that's
that
where
yeah.
I felt confident too, being able to say, "Yes, why don't you let me try to do this wedding for you?" Because I knew at least a little bit what I was doing.
Yeah, you
Um,
had essentially, like, shadowed a florist for a little while,
mhm,
and
yeah,
that's interesting. Okay, so when you first started, was it just you?
yeah. It was just me for a long time, and everybody talks about scaling and how important it is to add that first employee. And that is one piece of my business that I wish maybe I had jumped into a little bit sooner because I was still working full time, trying to do this as much as I could. Sometimes my husband would come and help me set up. My grandparents were helping me for a long time. Yeah, they would literally help do setups for me in their 80s, right? Isn't that amazing?
That's
Um,
really sweet.
yeah, so it was very much a family business, and then Jay got to be friends with a chef, and he was like, "Hey, I my wife is super creative. I think she would love to work with Sarah. Does Sarah ever need help?" And we were at the point where Jay was kinda like, I am not enjoying being your unpaid intern, and it's working with a partner or spouse is challenging. And so I was like, well, I think it's time. Why don't I just try it? Let's just try it out. And it's amazing. I working with her, I just like she just was the right personality who came in who as someone who works in an artistic and maybe you find this as a photographer, Sometimes I have a hard time taking what's in my head. Like I have a vision for what I think something needs to look like. And I have a really hard time taking that thing from my head and articulating it so that somebody else can create it. Right. So I was a lot of samples at that point, like showing and saying, okay, it needs to be, we work with recipes a lot in the floral industry, right? So that I know exactly what my stem counts are, what my profit margins are. So I'll say, like, here's the recipe for this centerpiece, have at it, but I will show like how it needs to look or what it should look like. So this was my first time. I mean, I'd worked in with my friend, the florist, with other people who were working with her. But it was the first time sort of being the boss in that way. So sure, I had a leadership role and I was the boss at my work, but certainly it wasn't my name on the brand. It wasn't my artistic vision that I'm trying to get across. So I felt so, and my first employee, so Christina, we're still friends to this day. She has gone on to do some pretty incredible things herself. But I feel so fortunate that she was my person because she just got it. Like there was just sort of this chemistry and this kind of like seamless, because she was artistic, because she sort of had a vision, she knew about color combination. I mean, I would give her a sample and she would just knock it out of the park. So, and then as I got bigger and bigger weddings, right? Sure, I can do some personal flowers and a few centerpieces myself. But when you start to do the scope of weddings that I was getting into, it is not a one person show in any way, shape, or form, let alone having multiple weddings in a day, which we can talk about later. But I had a lot of friends at the restaurant who, they were working for me at the restaurant. And then in their spare time, they would start coming to work with me doing flowers. So those were really some of my first people who were helping me. And I feel really fortunate because they knew me. They'd worked with me before, with the exception of Christine, they'd worked with me before. So they sort of knew like how to ask the right questions to get things out of my brain, if that makes sense. So I think like hiring that team or like finding those people who can ask you those questions if you are not great at articulating things has been times in our business when we have been like sailing and doing so awesome. It's when I have a team that knows how to ask the right questions. Um,
Well, let me just interrupt you for a sec. I'm thinking
yep.
about your first team coming from the restaurant world. Those are hustlers. Those are people that, you have to be a quick thinker, you have to focus. And yeah, you have to communicate with your team already. I mean, you don't want to collide with
Right, right.
somebody, you know what I mean? Like while you're carrying a tray of food. And so, and there are also people who have a flexible enough work schedule or lifestyle to show up for your gig type job,
Yeah.
um, which you need. But the fact remains that you had to teach them. They none of them had any floral experience probably, right?
And in
So
fact, to this day, I very rarely hire someone who has worked in a floral shop because I find that people come with a lot of things that were taught to them previously, rules that I might not necessarily use or follow. And so to have someone I mostly look for people who have an artistic background or a creative or like crafty background. Those people 100% have been easier and better to work with for me.
so, they're more teachable. You don't have to unteach or, get people to unlearn things that they have
Right,
already
right.
learned elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Delicious elderberry wine, fresh and healthy elderberry syrup, crisp ciders, all available 7 days a week at Wild Elder Wine and Cider Company, 76 Broadway in Jim Thorpe, specializing in regional folk wines and ciders just like your grandparents used to make. Elderberry, blueberry, raspberry, blackberry, apple. Now serving lunch too. That's Wild Elder Wine and Cider Company, 76 Broadway in Jim Thorpe. Open every day 11 till 5. Also available online at wildelder.com.
Interesting. Okay, and then, I mean, it begs the question too, like where, because you painted a picture of all of this taking place on your kitchen table. So what did your first space look like? Like how did you first function? Because I mean, for an event business, it is tempting to not have the overhead of a brick and mortar place that you're paying for perpetually, but you probably needed one.
Yeah, yeah. So 2008, we bought this house to flip. And the house that we were going to try to flip, we quickly realized we were under in, and we would need to live here for a while. And it had a 2-car detached garage that was a pretty good size. And so after a lot of back and forth, we decided that we would turn that into my studio space, because it really, the flower stuff was starting to take over the house in a way that, you had flowers and tables and all kinds of crazy things set up everywhere. It was hard, and we didn't even have a child at the time, but it was hard to just maneuver through the house. And so we put together the studio space pretty quickly. So like maybe we had a few months where I was working from the house, and then we realized like we got to get this out of here. And we worked out of that garage for like a really, really long time, probably like 8 or 9 plus years of the business. And it got to the point where like I was storing stuff under the house. I had a shed built, like a big shed next to the studio space that I had built, because a lot of the event stuff is our rentals, right? Like I have a lot of everything feels different, and you have a lot of rentals. Finally, I was like, I'm really running out of room. I got a pod. I had a pod in our driveway that I was using as storage. And it
Wait a
sort of,
minute. So when you say like a lot of the things were rentals, do you mean like you had to house things that you were renting to people for their events,
yeah,
right?
vases,
Oh,
candles, all of those things. So sort of in that full service florist, like in order for me to grow the business, I really had to be a full service florist. I couldn't, like, I started out and I was like just doing bouquets and a few little centerpieces, and you would have everything. But as you get deeper into the floral world and as you start to do those larger weddings, like nobody wants to own their 42-inch tall elevated centerpiece stand. Like that's, nobody's going to keep that afterwards. So it's something that we would take back and rent. And so there's sort of like this. And I liked the ethos of that too, right? Like that idea that I was able to repurpose things, that we weren't just like throwing candles out, and we weren't just throwing stuff away at the end of an event. So yeah, so once I got the pod, and we had like sheds and pods, and people would be like, "Where's this vase?" And I have to be like, "It's under the garage." No. Oh, is it in the pod? Oh, no.
did you have a map?
Yeah,
Was there
I
like
really should have. I wish I was that organized. No, it was like all just like shoved everywhere. Um, and so friends of ours had people who I knew in the wedding industry. Fox and Finch was the name of their company. They had started this vintage furniture rental company. Abby, one of the owners, and she went to the same small high school that I had gone to. And so we sort of like knew each other peripherally. And they found a space. They were also working out of their garage for a while, and then they found a space in this big old warehouse building, which they were in for a couple of years. And finally they decided that they needed more space, and they were going to move across the hall, but there was this empty space. And the rent, they were like, Sarah, we want really cool neighbors who like we would enjoy being with, and the rent is really cheap. And I was like, how cheap can the rent be? Like my rent is free at my house. But it's not free, right? Because
but
it
you're
means
paying
that
for a pod?
there's the pot. But it means that my business, right, is always on my back doorstep. So there's no division. It's right there. When people are working outside and they're coming into my house to use the bathroom. When clients are coming on the property, I had to take out extra insurance on my property. You're there is that time is not free. That like knowing that your business is housed in your home it's a different kind of scenario. So I finally bit the bullet, and I was like, okay, I can't even remember how cheap the rent was. It was like I don't know. I think it was like $400 a month or something. Like so inexpensive. And I was like, I need to do this. Like one wedding would pay for this rent. And it was a cool old warehouse building, right? Like it had these super high ceilings and it just felt like the right amount of artsy and kind of the next direction that I wanted to take my business. And it was right about the time, I'm trying to think of the time, was like right about the time that we started to really invest pretty heavily into Instagram, which dramatically changed it like doubled our business in a year. It was nice to have a cool space. Not that my garage wasn't cool in its own way, but like it was not the same as having this like cool, grungy, warehousey vibe that I like really loved.
Yeah, and to be co-located with Fox and Finch probably had its, fair share of I don't know, joys, efficiencies, like just, I'm sure you guys did styled shoots together and things
Yeah,
like that, right?
it's fun.
Yeah, and I honestly, like, we're bringing up Instagram, and I just mentioned styled shoots, like, I have to say, like, you really let's just say how easy it was to stand out back then. That in a sea of, like, the same old, you really rose above and, carved out a niche for yourself in your market as, like, I'm just gonna say it, you were like the most fashionable florist in the Lehigh Valley,
Mhm.
and you had some very interesting relationship alignments too. I mean, Fox and Finch, I think, would have helped. Like, you're all part of like the same sort of community that was, the height of fashion in the wedding and event industry, like the Lehigh Valley style connections, and like other people were looking to what you were doing, and I wonder how just how did you get there? And how would it be possible to get there today?
Oh, that's a tough question. It's so funny that you say that, like, oh, people were looking or watching, or you had like the business was this particular way. Because I think to me, I there's always this feeling of like I am not a formally trained florist, right? I am this scrappy entrepreneur who's just putting it together and trying to like do beautiful things. And I think for a long time in my business, that was just my goal. Like I still am sometimes like, oh, right, I'm a business owner. I need to like figure out the business piece of things, right? That's I think something that I was ill prepared to do or like not quite like it came along after the fact, right? Like the artistry and the joy of creating was what I loved first and foremost.
Yeah, and
Um,
and what you led with, you sent me what your mission is, and maybe I'll just read that back to you right now. So your mission statement is to create beauty, inspire, and transform. So you use that as a litmus test for the direction that you want the company to go in at all times. So it sounds like you're leading with your heart, and the like you everything you just described reminded me of that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's where it was, right? Like when I wanted to do a cool piece in Lehigh Valley style. So I contacted them and I talked to my photographer friend and we were like, let's do this together in the weddings issue. When I was doing styled shoots, this is before I realized like how much money I was actually spending on styled shoots that probably should have been going into my savings account. But but I was like, I want to create for the sake of creating. So at that time people were coming and showing either magazines or that's early social media or early Pinterest, and especially early Pinterest was like all the same thing like that. It just was like recycled images over and over. So like we got into this like burgundy blush and cream, right? Like but there's probably like 7 straight years where we did just that color profile. So for me to do those other things that maybe you're very sweetly saying is like cutting edge and like being at the top of my
Standing
game.
out.
Yeah, that standing out was more about having some creative freedom and autonomy and the ability to do, especially when you're like stuck in this rut of creating the same thing over and over and over again. Those sorts of projects gave me the ability to do something that felt different or that maybe would help set the tone and say, oh, you've been doing burgundy blush and cream, but have you seen orange and yellow together? Right? So like I think I think those are the kinds of things that excite me and light a fire in me, because like even like we're talking about that 9 to 5 job, right? When we're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, rinse and repeat, there is this piece of me that gets a little like, I don't know if stir crazy is the word that I want to use, but I always want to think about like, well, is there a cool new varietal of orchid that I've never worked with before? What would happen if we paired that with this? So while I want to say it's because I was being business savvy and smart about like finding the next trend to hop onto, what it really was about for me was how can I get my creative juices going and do something that I feel inspired by. We for a long time we were doing these creek dinners with Elisa. Yeah. So she had this like Bacon and Lox Society, and I loved those events because we got to just do like part of it was like the gift of giving into this thing. We would create these crazy things and then we would experience it, right? So mostly I'm setting up for a wedding. I'm not attending that wedding. So we set everything, and this is that transformation, right? We come into an empty room and we just like make it amazing, and then we walk away, and then we tear it all down in 6 hours. So yeah, but there is that piece of like being able to experience it, being able to live in the art, feel the art, watch it change. So I think that's what it really was about for me, more than thinking about the business piece of it. And your question, like, could I do it again in this current climate? I don't know. If I were starting a business now, if I were starting a floral business now, I don't know. I think I'd have to be like super niche and like really figure out like what is something that's not out there in the market that I love more than anything, and really lean hard and like speak to that. I love, like, we have a local florist in this area, and there's so many like growers who are becoming event florists. And I was recently in a group meeting with all of them, and it was like such a neat experience. Like it was a fellow florist had brought in a bunch of floral growers, local growers, to talk with us about what their offerings were, to kind of pick our brains about like what our needs were. And there was a business, she was a grower and she was a newer florist. And she was like, oh yeah, I only do in season local flowers. And if someone wants a baby's breath wedding, which like if baby's breath weddings have been the trend for like the last couple of years, like all baby's breath, right? She's like, yeah, I tell them I don't do it. I was like, what? You tell them you don't do it? Like, it was just mind blowing to me that she could feel that sense of security. And like, here I am in business for 16 years, right? And she is able to walk in there and be like, I think she's in her 20s right now. She's able to walk in there and be like, this is what I want to, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I want to do. And this is how it's going to go down. And if you want to work with me, cool. I'm going to create something fabulous for you. And she's an amazing designer, right? And if you don't want to work with me, all right, off you go. And meanwhile, I'm here like, oh my God, what would it look like if I did that? How would I pay my rent? How would I pay my people? How would I pay right? Like all of these things. So when I think about it now, like if I had to start over, or I love that idea of like starting small and like working within that one segment that you feel most attuned to.
Yeah, that's good advice. I remember when we first started out in the wedding photography business, a mentor of ours, my husband and I had a mentor named Glenn Johnson, and he told us that you're not going to know what kind of photographer you're going to be until you're about 5 years in. And that for the first few years, you're just going to try it all. You're going to try everything, you're going to have the black and white where like just the bouquet is in color, for instance. So, or, you're going to use like flash in a certain way just to experiment and try, and that you need to get out there and do that stuff in order to find your style, or eventually your niche. You got to define that niche. And I've always found, like getting back again to like thinking about like the stressfulness of the event industry, we've avoided it largely by trying as much as possible to convey who we are and what we do in our portfolio and on our website so that we attract that niche, so that we don't get people that are want us to do things that we're not showing them, So yeah, I see the wisdom in niching down. Like you're going to find the right people, and um, and it's great if, like you said, if you can enjoy a low overhead to be able to have that confidence to be like, nope, not for me. Sorry, people.
Right. Right. I feel like
It-
at a
it-
certain point, it got to be where I needed to, like, I need the business, right? So that I can pay my bills and do the things that I want to do with my family. And I found that I really liked having a team, right? I didn't have to do it all by myself. I don't want to lose that. So yeah, I
yeah.
think,
My mind's even thinking to examples in like the wine world. Like, so that's our other business my husband and I have. And, at first he just wanted to do dry. And we realized we were missing, like, potentially half the market. So, he had dry ciders, dry wine, and, the only way to make it sweet was to add his elderberry syrup to either of those things, and so he had to diversify his offerings, and it raises your overhead, in order to meet a broader, market's demand, so it's pretty cool if and on the other hand, like we know, like one of his mentors in the winemaking world is a cider maker who has a cidery in New York State called Aaron Burr Cidery, I think. And whatever he makes, and that's it. He's not like trying to please anybody except himself with his product, and it works out great for him.
yeah, I know. So there's this like peace. And when she was saying that, like in my head, I was like, what would it look like if I just did what I wanted to do? Um, but it's like, I don't know. We're so customer service facing, right? Like we're part of the service industry. And so I don't know, there's like that tension or that balance that, we have to figure out what's going to pay the bills, but also feed your soul creatively.
Yeah, and honestly, okay, so getting back to like the wedding world, like I think of times when my clients came to me with suggestions for things. Like I'll use an example like this. Like they saw all these photos on Pinterest that they wanted to recreate. And I, as the professional, would try to steer them away from that, and that's not something I could be tempted, and maybe a newer photographer might be like, okay, great, we're going to do all those photos just for you. But instead, like I tried to draw on my experience and play the professional and just be like, okay, well, maybe we could do one or two of those, but I would recommend not getting hung up on recreating somebody else's wedding day on your own. Like just enjoy the experience. And like you as a florist could probably do something similar, like that's great for inspiration, but let's come up with something truly new and unique like here and use like, use your expertise, your professionalism that they're hiring you for, that they're leaning on you for to really guide them toward what it is you recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there certainly is that piece of it. I think um flowers are a tricky thing, right? Like there's such a visual thing that people really need to have some. So I can say like, oh, for example, I'm bidding on a job right now, and this client had the most amazing Pinterest board. Like I just was super, super excited about it. She wants to do like all kinds of asymmetrical, very sculptural work, things that I don't have a lot of clients who are requesting yet. Right. Like I feel like this is definitely the direction I see floral design going in. But she messaged me to be like, hey, I have another quote from another florist, and she's like $2,000 less than what you are. And I'm going to need to know how to compare these two quotes. Like, I need to know like how many stems of whatever you're putting in, what the size or the shape of this thing is. Like, it was pretty intense what she was asking me. And you only know what you know to compare, right? So for her, comparing the size was maybe a good, like if they were very similar quotes, maybe comparing the size would be helpful. Or maybe, I mean, she was just asking genuine questions about how to compare these two quotes. But it really made me think about, how visual. She's like, can you share a picture of what you're trying to create? Because when she gave me her Pinterest stuff, I was like, oh, right away, I knew exactly in my head what I wanted it to look like, how I wanted it to feel. And could I sketch that out for her? Sure. Like, is there, like, I really feel like we're going to see so much AI happening in terms of like, that's the next direction for floral design. People are going to want to see exactly what the florals look like in their space, all laid out. Like it's going to get intense in that way. But this was the first time that it really felt like, okay, this is the direction we're going. People, it's hard. Like I was telling you, it's hard to like tell an employee what something in your head is going to look like. Imagine trying to share with a client what something in your head is going to look like, right? Who maybe isn't a visual person, isn't a creative person, isn't. So there's a lot of trust that the client is putting
It's
in you.
all about trust. And
Right.
like I rely upon it so much. And if I don't have trust with the client, it's not a good fit. Like I've said to people before that I feel like at the booking, it's half the decision has to be in their gut, that they can trust you to deliver the quality of work that you've shown them, that you can do in your portfolio. And for them to hold you to a level of such specific accountability seems really unfair. Like it binds your hands too, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're showing an image, like I don't know, maybe those flowers weren't available. And it's the same thing like with a photographer. Like, I don't know, it rained. It was really windy on your wedding day, or like, like the magic just didn't happen exactly how you thought it was going to in your head, and we need to have confidence that our clients are going to be down to earth enough to accept that variability. Like, but it sounds like you're facing a different standard.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think that was just like, that was the best way she knew how to compare side to side, right? If she had a great experience talking with both of us. So I don't know that, but I told her I couldn't actually give her. So I showed her pictures of what high center pieces that we had done looked like in the venue. But I was like, what you're asking us to do is actually art. It's very different from just like this ball of flowers that everybody else wants. You're asking us to create something sculptural, asymmetrical. So I can't tell you it's going to be, exactly 3 feet by 5 feet tall, and it's going to have this. So I sent some pictures of some ideas. And I said, like, I won't even give you stem counts, because if the hydrangea comes in like a super small ball that week, instead of twice the size, which it normally should be, then at my cost, I'm going out to get the extra hydrangea because I know that I
You
want it
want a
to look.
ball.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So, so it is kind of that interesting thing to have to communicate that with a client and say, like, this is, how do we compare apples to apples? How do we compare, and contrast like what everybody's doing, and how do we stand out from everyone?
And now a word from our sponsors.
Live from downtown Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Wine, Cider, and Song, brought to you by Wild Elder Wine and Cider Company.
Old Wild Elder came down from the mountain, said the secret of youth ain't found in no fountain. If you want to feel spry, we pass the age of 99. You gotta have a daily chug of Wild Elderberry wine. You gotta drink it dry. Elderberry wine. You gotta drink it dry. Wild Elderberry wine. You gotta
something that I think I'd really love to get across. Some of the biggest changes in my company happened in major personal life milestones. So, like when Maggie was born and when I was diagnosed with cancer. So, those are two like big turning points in how I ran my business and what I did. So, I don't know
Yeah,
if there's a
absolutely.
way to ask that question, but I would love
Let's
to speak to that a little bit.
So when you're a small business owner, it's just vital that you continue to show up every day. In your experience, how have you handled it when you've had life emergencies or when you needed to take some time away from your business?
Yeah, I to me, some of the biggest changes that I made in my business, sort of like the most critical turning points in my business, have happened with big life experiences for me personally. So, my first big experience was when my daughter was born. I had sort of a high risk pregnancy, and at the time that she was born that year, I did so I any party over 6 went through me at the restaurant I was working at, so doing the event planning. And so we did over 700 events, and I did 32 weddings. So it's no wonder that my daughter was 8 weeks early, right? But I that was the turning point for me where I was sort of like I I was really scared to take that leap into full-time business for myself. I'd always thought that this business would just be in addition to or adjacent to another full-time gig, right? And so I was really worried financially, could I do this? And being pregnant with Maggie sort of made it very clear to me that I had to take that leap. I wanted to continue to see this business through, and it would give me the flexibility to be the mom that I wanted to be and to be with my daughter in the way I wanted to be. So that was a huge leap for me because that's when I went from a part time business to like, all my chips are in. I'm all in. This is my business. And I wouldn't change that for the world. I'm so glad that that sort of forced me into that position.
How many years ago was that? Like, how old's Maggie?
So, yeah, Maggie is going to be 13 in June. So like 12
Okay.
years ago when I went full
So,
time.
so putting the timeline together here for like 3 years, you were
It was my side
break,
hustle.
breaking your neck,
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
for Melt still
Yep.
the
Yep.
trendy. Okay, wow. And how many events were you doing roughly in your floral business?
So that year that I left, I had 32 weddings that year on
That's
top
a
of all of
lot.
these events. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You could do that just without that other job and be busy, like, and I just
Yeah.
don't know how you did it, and yeah, no,
Yeah.
so no wonder you were, like, Maggie was
I got
early.
yeah, I got put on bed rest, and I literally Jay was bringing flowers into the hospital, and I was doing flowers from bed rest in the hospital. Like,
Mm.
it was that crazy.
Wow.
Um,
And did
which
you
is
have a you had a team by that point though a little bit, right? Like, did you have
I just had
anybody?
the one person. I just had the one
Okay.
person working with me. Yeah, and because
Wow.
she was early, right? Like, I had booked these weddings counting on her not being early.
Mhm.
So it was sort of wild. And then, in direct contrast, like what I'm talking to you about is working all the time, going all in, doing all of the things. And then in direct contrast, so 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that sort of took everything to this like screeching halt. Um, and I realized that I had just like my business was everything. It had become my personality. It had become like it was just what I like. Yes, I was investing in my family, but it was just like all the time concentrating on thinking about working on the business, in the business. And, there are a number of interesting things about florals and pesticides and cancer and a number of things that we could go into on another occasion. But I think the key takeaway here is that I was really struggling with letting go of the business and having a manager run the day to day. So we were sort of at that point financially in the business where that needed to happen. But I was really struggling with letting go of that control, like, oh, nobody can do this but me, right? Letting go of that control to step back and stop being a designer and start being a business owner. And it was so clear at that point that that is what needed to happen next in the business for my um, health and well being, for my family's health and well being, and even for my company, right? Because I just I physically was not able to be there in the same way.
Had you considered it like this, like the illness sort of forced your hand? And I think that, a lot of small business owners struggle with this point exactly, which maybe again, it boils down to trust. Like they don't trust anybody else to do at the end of the day what has their name on it, what their reputation depends upon. This is a problem that a lot of small business owners have, like being able to trust somebody else to run the day-to-day operations when you are used to doing it yourself, and trusting that like they're going to be dependable to deliver the quality of work that you yourself can deliver. And I have to ask, this illness forced you to get there, and you needed to get there, but did you consider getting there before, or was it just unthinkable until it ultimately was necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I knew I needed to scale, right? Like, I'd been reading so many books on scaling the business, and I'd been reading about, if I wanted to continue to grow the business, like I could not physically keep doing it all myself, right? Like, there's just a certain point where like you can't work all the time. And so I had hired a manager already. I was like 2 years into managers, but I was still there all the time. Like the manager would
Well,
be like, running
go
things, but
ahead.
I was still like sitting in the office doing my work, making sure it was all right. I mean, like when I think about it, I wanted to have that freedom, and I wanted to like really trust somebody. And I also think that I made some, maybe I didn't have the greatest hiring choices right out for that manager role. And so I was definitely faltering a little bit, right? And so that like the timing ended up working out perfectly, that a manager left. She didn't want to continue to work with us, and someone who was working in the business just as a designer who was amazing, I was diagnosed, and she was like, I'll step in and do this just for a little while till you can hire somebody. And she was like unreal. And it was the perfect timing. And she just showed me what was possible, right? Like, oh, really amazing people do exist and can make this work. And, in many ways, it's always great to promote from within, because these people have worked with you. They know what your deal is. They they appreciate who you are for who you are, and they're not going to try to change you, and they know how to work with you, right? So to have that was really great. And to be honest with you, I have a management team right now that are two women who came from within, who worked with me, and who came to me and said, we want to do this role together. Like, we think we each have these strengths, and we want to do this role together. And it was hard for me to figure out financially, how could I pay two people a manager's rate, but I realized I had to do it. And my business, in many ways, like that, the running of the business has never felt more smooth and amazing to me, because there are these people who have worked with me for a long time, who are now promoted into this role, and they're just killing it. They are doing such amazing things. And so I would never have gone for that before this diagnosis in a million years. And so it is, sometimes you need that thing to shake it up and be like, oh, this is what's possible. And I've just been sort of like had my blinders on and haven't looked at what could be done, or what could be.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure that we check in with that stage of growth that you mentioned earlier, where you are now doing multiple events on the same day. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
So
and just to quantify things, we talked about how like when you had Maggie and on one employee, you had 32 weddings a year. Like, so what's your staff size now and wedding count?
um so Post-COVID was the highest, right? So we had all those rescheduled weddings. So I think post-COVID, we did something like 170 weddings and events that year. It was insane. We had a team of 20. And that's not 20 full-time people. That's, people coming and going. Now we're sort of finding out like what's the new normal in terms of, how many weddings are we book. I think this year, our average is usually 150. This past year, we did around 100. So it was definitely a lighter year business wise for us, and our team was leaner. So we've had maybe 6 or 7 people rotating in on a regular basis, including my 2 managers. Next year, it looks like we'll go back up to that like 130, 150 in terms of wedding count. And so we'll probably need to add a person or 2. But that is what it looks like. Crazy post-COVID times. There was one weekend where we in one day did like, I think it was like 6 weddings in one day. Now some of them are smaller, right? Like just personal flowers, not a full scale wedding. But it was wild. I mean, no, it was so stressful and so intense. So we sort of set some limits on it. Now we typically will say we will do up to 5 weddings in a weekend. And that is based on the size of the wedding, right? So if someone's coming to me and they have, so our average wedding is in the like 5 to 6K range right now. And that's like a pretty standard 150 person, 4 people in your like bridal wedding party. That's sort of the size range, right? So if all of a sudden we have a 400 person wedding with 40 tables, and like, then I'm not going to take on 4 other weddings that weekend. So it's really scaled to who's coming and who's booking. But for the most part, 5 is the max we want to do. And really, I try not to do more than 3 in a day if we can, just because it's hard to manage all the moving parts of that and not feel that level of stress.
And I gotta ask, like, what's your overhead for something like that? Because I imagine, like, are people transporting things in company vehicles or their own vehicles? Like, what? I mean, you need a van, don't you? Like, is there like how many vans, and are they going around the Lehigh Valley to all of these events? How does this work logistically with your,
Yeah.
require equipment needs,
And I mean,
vehicle
they're going to
needs?
Philly and the Poconos in New York. They're like, it's not just in the Lehigh Valley. So we have a company van. At a certain point, I realized that I would save money on we were at that point where we were doing so many weddings that it made sense for us to purchase a van because of the amount we were paying in rentals. So we did
So you
purchase
were
that.
you were renting vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's important to know. Like, people think about like in going back to our wine business, like getting to events. Like if we want to hire somebody to go staff an event for us and they have to transport our product to that event, like we need a company vehicle or we need to rent one. So that's what you
Yeah.
did at first. And do you need
Yeah.
like refrigerated vehicles because you're dealing with flowers, or it's not that crazy?
So it really depends on the time of year, right? So 9 times out of 10, you're not going to need a refrigerated vehicle. In our van that we purchased, we do have this like super like air conditioner unit that was added to the aftermarket. Like I added it to the vehicle to like bring the temperature down in the van. But mostly we only will rent specific vans where we can have the back open so that the air conditioning is coming through the entire van to really like circulate through and keep the space cool. That's usually plenty. If I were going 3 or 4 hours away and I knew that the air could, like if we were doing an outdoor wedding in mid-July, 4
July.
hours away, then we're going to rent a refrigerator truck. So it just depends on kind of what we're doing. But 9 times out of 10, you're okay with the air conditioning system in the van. And there have been times when the van place has given us a van, and like if the air conditioning isn't working, I have to say like have to like make a quick decision and figure out how do I fit this into like 6 different cars, or how do I switch the van? I mean, like it's there have been crazy times like that where we have to make some quick decisions. Like we said at the very beginning, it's like that constant putting out of fires. So yeah, but it's just the reality of working with a perishable product, right?
Right. Yeah. And I also think that it's interesting, like the nature of events, that you can plan your equipment needs so far in advance. You can plan your staffing needs so far in advance that you're able to look at like your contracts, because people book these things so far in advance, and you can bring together the human or other resources that you need for the job and build out, the build that into the quote. Like I think it's a just an interesting way to kind of get your toe wet in any business, if you're dealing with events that like you don't have to commit to these ongoing expenses. Like you don't need a fleet of trucks to
Right,
have a
right.
floral business.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating to me. We talked about your customers really in like that you built your audience largely on Instagram. And initially it was word of mouth, but that social media and then print media through our regional magazine, was were pretty huge for you. Does that continue to work for you? Like it's mainly word of mouth and social media at this point, and word of mouth often coming from the venues, right?
Yeah, our number one resource at this stage of the game is vendor referrals. Instagram did it literally doubled my business initially because I think it put me out there to a much larger audience. And also, that audience, I think the algorithm was very different then than it is now. Like, who knows what the algorithm even is
I
doing now?
know. No, we can't.
But
Nobody knows.
no,
Yeah,
nobody knows. But I do think that I now view Instagram more as like, yes, I want to put content out there on a regular basis, but I don't think that I'm finding as many new clients from it as I once was. I think what it really is now is a portfolio for us. So the vendor refers us. So like oftentimes it's photographers and venues. They're referring us and they're saying like, oh, you're looking for flowers? Check out Allium. And so the first place I feel like the clients don't even go to our website anymore, right? So the first thing they're doing is going onto Instagram and taking a look at what we do. So I see it as it's more in a supporting role than an actual generating sales kind of role. I wish that weren't the case. It was really fun. Like in the early days of Instagram where you were posting stuff and people were really excited about it. Now like everything just feels so oversaturated. So from
it
that
is.
perspective, yeah.
I'm not disappointed. It's funny. Like I like to hear that your IRL relationships matter more. Like
Yeah.
that bodes well, for humanity in my opinion, that you still have to get out there and make those connections and earn those referrals, from a job well done. And it's not about the smoke and mirrors of social media and how big your audience is. It's really about showing up and doing a good job. And people will talk, people will happily refer you, and because they want you on their team.
Yeah, and making it a smooth experience for the vendor as well, right? So, we have a lot of venues who refer us because they know that we're going to send a team that like is going to respect their space. That's not going to be like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do it? Like we have these huge sections of notes about each venue that are like our team. If you're a new person to that venue, you read all of these detailed notes that we've made about like what the venue is like and what the person who works at that venue is like and what they expect from you. And so I think we worked hard to foster those relationships because I feel like they are our number one source of referrals and of business. We're so
Yeah, and
grateful for
then
it.
yeah, and then treating, like you said, is very interesting that websites are less relevant today, and treating the social media platform more like a curatorial space where it's your portfolio. You're going to curate a collection, that represents your brand and gives them a feel that shows, like, oh, this is a reputable business and I like their style, I like their vibe, I'll contact them. So it's actually I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off, the small business owner who's gotta wear a million hats, and, they're beating themselves up thinking that, they're not doing enough to show up on social media and create this content, really just take a deep breath. If you are delivering a service in your community, like, it is so much more important to have those relationships than to have, all the best content on your social media, hands down. Like, and so I actually, I like to hear that. How are you making a difference in your community?
Hmm, that's a good question. I've struggled with that over the years. We get requests all of the time where people are like, "Oh, can you just do flowers for this event or that event for us?" And unless it's like really aligned with our mission and with who I have a hard time diving into that. So for us, it's been little things. Like we have an event coming up. There is this amazing woman, Amanda Buss, who works
Amanda?
with, Amanda, she's
Uh,
so great. So
uh,
she's worked with the cancer community for a long time and now specifically with the breast cancer community. And we're doing this wreath making fundraiser together for the holidays. And that feels so aligned with what I feel passionate about. I want to really support women in that journey that I have experienced, and this is a way that I can give back in doing it, rather than, oh yeah, here's a bunch of centerpieces to some gala that doesn't have anything to do with anything that we're passionate about. So we really try to think about how can we connect with our community in ways that align with who we are.
Yeah, yeah, I feel that. In your business, are there any tools that you're using that have been instrumental to your success?
Yeah. I think certainly a specific STEM counting software, that was a big financial move for me to go from, like, I used to like literally write it down on this. There's a joke about how I always have these stacks of yellow legal pads was how I would like calculate things.
I love those. They're great.
Yeah, yeah, right? And so I switched, I mean, maybe it's like 9, 8 years ago. I switched to a STEM counting software, and that really made a difference for me because I'm able to, like, it is goes down to the, like, I tell it exactly how much the flowers are costing. I put the recipe together, it figures out, like, oh, Sarah, yeah, I know you really want those orchids in there, but that is going to way blow your budget. Whereas before I was just designing whatever I thought would be beautiful, and that is not always a profitable model. So it was really good for me to actually see it in black and white with this tool to kind of put everything together. And for my team, it's so much better than them having to try to work with these recipes from my yellow legal pad, but instead it just like prints out in this beautiful way, like, this is what's in the centerpiece, da 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 da. So that has been a really fabulous tool. We also
What's
use
it called?
base. It's called Curate.
Okay,
So
go ahead. And what else do you
for the,
use?
yeah, it's for the events industry. It's a fantastic tool. Bakers can use it, and people who manage rental inventory can use it too. So it's a great tool. The other piece that we use HoneyBook a fair bit. The only thing Curate doesn't do well is the client interaction piece. So we use HoneyBook because I really love that interaction. So a client will sign the contract in HoneyBook, our interactions back and forth, because I have an admin person who is also messaging the clients. It helps to kind of keep everything in one place. So those are like the two we use in conjunction with one another. And then our team works out of Basecamp, which has been so great because when we go to an event, all of the documents from the event, the recipes, the proposal, it's all in a file, so that when someone's at, like, we always have a hard copy printed, but if they forgot the hard copy, they can just pull it up on their phone, which is wonderful. And then when they're taking pictures at the event, they're dropping it in, video pictures, they're dropping it into that file so that our social media person can then grab it out of the file afterwards and then use it to create reels or use it to create whatever they need. So it's been such a great resource to kind of keep everything all in one place. Maybe we could do it with a Google Doc or a Google Drive, but something about the way it works has been really, really helpful for us.
Cool. Yeah, I know it can be overwhelming deciding what tools to use. And I love that there is specialized floral industry applications. I didn't know about stem counts before this talk. So now I feel like
I
I'm in on the
know.
lingo. Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew about the recipes. I knew that there were bouquet recipes, but I didn't know about the stem count. That makes total sense.
Yeah. I mean, that is how our profit, like that's, so it's like whatever your flower cost is, you are multiplying that by, whatever you need to do to cover your expenses. Most people have a 3-time markup, or like in New York, they're going to have a 4 or 5. Sometimes in LA has like a 6-time markup on the product. And then there's a percentage for labor that's added on top of that.
Okay,
So
good to know.
yeah, yeah,
Thanks for
all the
sharing
fun
that.
things.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
do
And I
you
hope other florists out there are doing that, because I think it's really important across the board. I didn't know that coming into it, right? I was literally just doubling the cost of my flowers. And one time my wholesaler saw that and she said, "Oh, what are you charging?" And when she said, "No, no, no, that's not how the industry does it." And that was shocking for me, because I just hadn't had that training to know that, right? And so not only was I undercutting my fellow florists, right? So I was losing out on money, on profit margin, but also I was undercutting my fellow florists because I didn't know, or I didn't understand that, like, this is what the markup needs to be so that we can all grow our businesses. I'm sure it's just like when you see photographers. I just like saw a photography package come up on the wedding vendor thing, and they were charging $750 for a wedding. I was like, how you're spending 40 hours editing those pictures after the wedding? You are making $2 an hour. You know what I mean? Like, I just think
it's
that
not
is so
sustainable. Yeah, that's
right.
like they'll arrive at that conclusion naturally, hopefully. But
Right. But
yeah,
I didn't know that starting out, right? I was just so excited to do my craft and get some money for it, that I
yeah,
didn't understand
yeah,
that there are these great principles in place. There are these tools and these things that we can do to have a robust business that we can make a living at. Not just like
yes.
struggle as
Get
starving
by.
artists, but
No, you won't even get
make
by.
a living.
Eventually, it'll go out of business if you're not charging enough. So
Right.
you're preaching
Right.
to the choir.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if you could do anything differently, what would it be?
I think I would have loved to see me move out of the design piece of the business sooner. So really had teams running it the way we run it now. I love the client interaction piece, is like my favorite part of things. So to be able to sit with a client and meet with them and get their vision for what they want to create and help add our spin to it. And I even love talking about the budget piece, right? Like, I think it's so fascinating to say, like, oh, how do we do this for X amount of dollars, right? So that really is where I want to be now, and I've always enjoyed that part, and so I wish that I had done that sooner, because I think it would have been a lot less stress on my body. I think it would have ultimately probably been better for my family. And I think it would have allowed me to let go of some of my like very rigid, we're raised to have this, like, or at least I was raised to, like, you work, like, your work drive, your
It's
work ethic,
work
that's
ethic.
everything, right? And
Mhm.
I was so proud of the fact that I had put everything into this business. And I wasn't like honoring myself or what my needs were, or what was bringing me joy outside of my work, right? Like, I feel like I was so far removed from like, I had become the machine. I was so far removed from my humanity. And I think in many ways cancer for me was that wake up call, like, oh, this it's so awesome that I get paid to do what I love, right? It's awesome. But it is not who I am as a person. And so to like really discover myself now after all of these years feels like so exciting and fulfilling. And so I do wonder, had I put into place, like, had I realized how quickly I was growing, and had I put into place a management team or people who are doing the day-to-day operations sooner, would I have had a little bit more freedom to find that piece of myself? And we'll never know. Like, maybe for me, cancer was that wake up call, because I might never have divorced myself from that. But yeah, it's a good question. And I think too, knowing the numbers sooner. I really struggled with, I just like hate, I still don't love the business part of my business, right? I want to do all of the fun things, the meeting with people, the connecting with people, the design. Like I want to do those things way before I want to sit down and open QuickBooks and like see where we're at month to month, right? Like who wants to read a P&L? I mean, I know there are people out there who do, but like that does not light me on fire. And so I I do wish, I think as a business, I would have been more successful had I been able to like push through and really start to look at the money piece of my business, not just the fun piece of my business sooner.
You're amazing. It has been so fun talking to you. I cannot express how just inspirational you are, really. I love how you're so insightful. And I'm really just humbled and honored that you had this conversation with me today. So thank
Thank
you
you
so
so much
much,
for
Sarah.
thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. I feel like as business owners, we just sort of like, go into our day to day and we do our thing, but it's rare that we get to really talk about the roots of the business and what's happening in it now and how we see it evolving. So in a way, like coming and talking about this has really given me a lot to think about. I was just preparing for this, right? It gave me a lot to think about, where were we? Where are we going? What's happening right now? So I just appreciate this opportunity to reflect on it and think about it. And I'm so excited to listen to the podcast and hear what's going to continue to come from other business owners.
Yeah. On that note, let me know if you know of anybody that you think would make a good candidate for an interview.
Yeah.
What in like just a couple sentences, what's next for you? Where do you see this? Like, I know just a couple sentences too. Um, but really, like, you know, I think we've chatted before about like if having like, do you have an exit strategy? Like, all those things. Like, how long will
Yeah.
how
So,
where do you see yourself going in the future with your business? I mean, you're kind of
yeah.
already there. Like it evolved to a place where like you've got a system in place now, a team that can, run the day to day and you're doing the things that really light you up and that it doesn't tax you very much. Like you could probably continue to do this for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, very like I could talk to our clients all day every day. That's really fun for me. So, yeah, I see us continuing sort of in the path that we're in. I would like to take on that sweet spot where we don't have to take all the weddings to cover the bills, right? Like I would like to start working on some very special kind of like side project weddings who want to do things that are really outside of the box and kind of almost get back to our roots in that way, right? Like what's next in floral design? Do you want to play with that at your wedding? Cool. Let's try that. And that's not to say that if you want a beautiful classic white and greenery wedding, like we're here for you. We're going to do it. We're going to do an awesome job at it and like we love that. But I also want to think about, what inroads can we make into doing something that feels different? And I think as a whole and as I've started to come more into myself and I we're of a certain age now, right? Like we were laughing about our 20s and how we like had all the passion in our 20s.
We
Um,
went hard.
yeah, we went hard. And now I really like I love my downtime. I traveled for 2 months cross country this summer and I loved that. And I have this like place in my heart where I really want to create really cool experiences for women, like maybe on a larger scale where like is there travel involved? Are we doing flowers together? I don't know what it looks like. It's just like in the like very beginnings of my heart, but like I just love this idea of just being in community with other women and like there's sort of this like very it's sort of healing time that comes in like working together, doing things with our hands and like sharing meals together and dancing together and like all of these things. And I don't know how the flowers weave into that. And I don't know like what that looks like, but that like right now there's like this little piece of me that's trying to think about what that could look like. So that's where I'm going next, right? Like thinking about community on a much larger. I like love that you brought up that community question because I feel like it's such a small segment of what we do now, but it's something that I feel like in the future is going to be a big piece of maybe what I'm doing, and the company, parts of the company may weave along with that.
I love it. And you deserve, like you said earlier about like the creek dinners, which I can just I need to pause and paint a picture of that. You mentioned Elisa Tong, a mutual friend of ours that you partnered with to create basically for yourselves what you created for your clients all these years, and to revel in that moment yourselves, and to appreciate the artistry behind the work that all these event vendors bring to the table, professionally for others, and to enjoy it yourself. And so it sounds like, that's where you're moving in your life in this next phase. So I'm so excited to see what happens and what comes of it. And thank you again, Sarah. I really appreciate you.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Launch Local is an original podcast produced and recorded by Amber Artemis at Leisure Lane Studio in Jim Thorpe, PA. Show music is by Joshua Finsel. This is a video podcast available for viewing on YouTube or at the show website, launchlocal.biz, where you can subscribe to the show newsletter and find helpful tools like the Ready to Launch quiz. Take the quiz at launchlocal.biz to find out how I could help you launch your own local business.